We are recording. We are on the air. I just want to let everyone know that. So, again, thank you, Ann. Delicious. Absolutely delicious. Mm-hmm. So,
what would you like to just say before we start the record that Ann made delicious chili tonight?
Ann made delicious chili?
It's being recorded.
Oh.
Disguised. Happy chili?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Yeah, where are all
Spaghetti and meatballs are great.
Here, I made enough for an army. Where are you?
So we're picking up on step 25, and we'll humbly talk about humility. Humility, and I'm sure this is probably just kind of wasted on this group, but I thought maybe we'll talk about that.
Oh, did you guys already do 24?
Yeah, we already did 24, so
Okay.
we're up on 25 humility.
Okay.
Yep. So I'm on page 188 of the text. Humility is constant forgetfulness of one's achievements. The admission that in all the world one is the least important and is also the greatest sinner. It is the mind's awareness that one is weak and helpless. It is to forestall one's neighbor at a contentious moment and to be the first to end a quarrel. It's kind of interesting. The acknowledgement of divine grace and divine mercy, the disposition of a contrite soul, and the abdication of one's will. Humility is a grace in the soul and with a name known only to those who have experienced it. I kind of highlighted that. Humility is a grace in the soul and with a name known only to those who have experienced it. What does he mean by that? How do you know humility? That's the question.
You have to have experienced it.
It's an experience thing, right? That's what he's saying here. It's an experience thing. So I guess, I mean, for the purpose of the class, we could try to describe, and it kind of does here too, some of the things that I guess a humble person or person who has humility would do. It says it's the mind of awareness that one is weak and helpless. So it's that awareness, there he is, that awareness that, we are weak and helpless. And it is to forestall one's neighbor at a contentious moment and to be the first to end a quarrel. Now that's interesting too. What does that have to do with humility? To be able to forestall one's neighbor at a contentious moment and to be the first to end a quarrel.
Well, usually you end a quarrel by apologizing, saying that you were admitting your fault and trying to, which would be being humble, I guess, admitting that you were part of the problem, I guess.
Right, just to end it, because sometimes when we go ahead and we quarrel, what's the reason for the quarrel most of the time? What do you want to do? What's that?
Pride.
Right. You got to prove you're right. Someone says you're wrong. You have to prove you're right. So we can get into those kind of contentious moments too, at that point. But it's to turn around and say, let's just go ahead and end it. You're right, I'm wrong, or something like that. But just to go ahead and end it, and to do so humbly instead of, certainly not contentiously, certainly not out of anger, angrily say, okay, fine, I don't want to talk about it. I don't know if that's a very good display of humility. Again, it's like a lot of things. It's not so much what we do, but how we do it, and in what manner and what love or lack thereof that we do it, right? So he writes here again, he says, if pride is a sin that blinds us to reality, the passion that makes us think ourselves better than we really are, then humility is the virtue by which we see the truth. Now, what truth is he referring to? What is truth, huh? What truth is he referring to here?
The fact that we're all sinners and we're all being taken by the devil on a daily basis.
Sure. It says because when we think of ourselves as being better, then humility should be that thing that brings us back down and makes us realize that we're not better. It's the thing that would turn around and say, you know what? It's always like when we were talking about the sin. What is the worst sin you could do, right? And you could always think that person that you're having this discussion with, or this person that you're trying to put down for whatever reason, has already done that worst sin. Whatever you think it is, their sin is worse than whatever you've done, whatever you could have even thought of, right? Because obviously we know ourselves and we know we wouldn't do something like that. But we're always quick to judge, and we talk about that in the judgment part. But in humility, what do you do? And again, this gets back to what our standard is. What do you do when you're humble or working on humility?
You look at yourself.
You look at yourself and you judge by what? By that other person, right? No, by
God.
by God, by Christ. So if you turn around and say, look at that sinner there, that bum or that murderer, all right? We kind of talked about this before. Open up the paper. You don't have to look too far. You're going to find somebody who, cold-blooded murder, someone who has shot somebody, abused children, did all kinds of terrible things, right? And we can see that. We can, with a discerning mind, we can say, that's wrong. That is absolutely wrong. And we should say that. That's not judging, all right? A lot of times people say, well, you can't judge me, you don't understand me, so you can't judge me. But no, you can discern that if you do something like that, if you murder somebody, if you shoot somebody, abuse somebody, hurt somebody, yeah. You can discern and say, that's wrong. There's nothing wrong with that. You're not judging them or condemning them because you don't know the circumstances, but certainly to see that. And I know sometimes with the kids, as the kids get older and they like to, split those hairs with you and stuff like that and say, well, you don't understand all the things. Well, yeah, maybe I don't understand everything, but I'm not judging you. I'm not judging what the other people are doing either. What I'm saying is that through discernment, and we're called to discern. I mean, that's really what it's all about. We discern it in ourselves and we discern it in the world around us. What happens if we don't? What happens if we can't discern?
Anarchy.
Yeah, anarchy, certainly of the soul, but I mean, it'll be one of those things where, Paul says everything is allowed, but not everything is good. If you can't discern, then you're going to say everything is allowed and everything is good.
Right.
It doesn't really matter how that leads me, right? But yeah, it's a matter of not judging the person and condemning them for it because we might not understand. We might not.
We judge the behavior, I guess you could say, right?
Okay, yeah, that's true. That's true.
We know what they did is wrong, but we're not going to say,
right.
Therefore they're a terrible person,
right.
Worse than me.
Hate the sin, but love the sinner. And
Discernment changes to judgment as soon as you say, well, at least I'm not as bad as you.
Right.
Whenever you bring yourself and your own soul into that is where you cross the line. So
We lose that
You
discernment.
want to have kind of, what is it, there, but for the grace of God goes
There
on,
you go.
kind of an idea.
Yeah. Well, and I that's a good point because I think that sort of mentality, as it were, at least certainly keeping that to the forethought, should make you humble because you know that it's by the grace of God that you're not in that same situation. Because all of us, I mean, anyone can sin, anyone can fall into some kind of hardship. You don't understand, could fall into some sort of hardship or some sort of situation where they do end up sinning. I don't know. I hope that never happens, but it could. So we'd have to say, there but by the grace of God goes I. And when you say that, you can also see yourself in that person, right? You can see yourself possibly being in that same situation. And you could maybe kind of stop and think for a minute, well, what would put me in that situation? I mean, I'm not a bad person, I go to church and all this other stuff, but what would cause it? Would it be maybe an illness in the family, maybe a loss of a job, maybe, a lot of people are just one little disaster, a car breaking down, right?
Random act.
A random act, yeah, a random act. Sometimes when you look at those things, it's never always one thing that would put you into those situations. A lot of times it's a series of unfortunate events, right? And an illness which leads to you losing a job, which leads you to losing your house, which leads you to losing your family, blah, 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 and there you are, right? And you've got to think about that. Maybe that's how that person ended up there on the street as well, right?
Right.
Maybe it's not just because of drugs and alcohol and, crime and all this other stuff. There might be some other reasons too.
It just made me think of a story I read. I'll just tell it real quick. This lady was pulling into a spot in the grocery store and she was getting ready to get out of her car. And then a truck came to the spot that was like, here she is, and it was coming to this one. And the guy gets out and he yells at her, "How do you expect me to park here when you have your car pulled up so far into this spot?" And she's like, "Whoa." But he just glared at her until she did it. So
Wow.
she got back in, she backs up a little bit so he can pull in. And she's fuming. I mean, she's just so upset. And the whole time she's in the store, she's looking for him, thinking, I'm going to give him a piece of my mind. And he would just keep, disappearing around another lane, So finally, she's thinking, okay, Lord, I want to say something to this guy. I hope I, can be next to him pretty soon here. Well, there he is when she's getting ready to check out. And she said she opens her mouth and she hears herself saying, "I'm so sorry that I made it difficult for you to park. Will you forgive me?"
Wow.
And he went, "I'm so sorry too. He had gotten into the car with a toddler.
Oh.
And she could tell he looked kind of, like tired and disheveled.
Yeah.
He says, "We have a newborn. I don't know how to grocery shop. I don't know what I'm doing here. I'm just getting what I can. I need to get home. My wife is with," and so then she understood,
Right.
that was why he had kind of this little bit of a temper tantrum.
Sure.
And I just love that story because it does show like what you're saying. We don't know what's going on with people and why they might
react the way they
do
Right.
the things they do.
Right, no, that's a good point. And I would say that it's humility that would cause us to kind of take, I guess, maybe the high road, but certainly the graceful road, and say, well, let me apologize, or, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to, make your life so miserable, or whatever, And that's the hard thing to do, isn't it? Like you say, the first thing you want to do, someone cuts you off on the road, someone takes your parking spot. Talk about parking. When I was working at Ford Motor Credit, the big thing was parking spaces. This was back in the early 90s. Big thing was parking spaces. And you made it because your parking space kept getting closer and closer to the front door. And so they'd have numbers on them. There's no, reserved for so-and-so. They just had a number on them. So a
you
lot
knew
of
what your number was.
Right. So
Okay.
so as you're moving up or in seniority or something like that, you would have number 12 or something like that, which would be right up there against the curb. So you didn't have to walk 2 rows back like the rest of them. You were right there up at the curb. You got out and you got to walk right into the building. I guess you got to work faster. But the thing is that if you come into the parking lot early, you couldn't take parking spot 12 because that didn't belong to you. If you didn't have a numbered spot, you had to park way in the back, and you would have to walk just as far whether you got there early or late.
But would people do that sometimes? Would they take those spots?
That was the thing. People would do that, and I think a lot of times they didn't know. Well, this is kind of weird, if you had one of those parking spots, they would give you these bright orange stickers about this big. And the idea is you take the sticker and you put it on their window and just say, it's one of those things, not too nasty. It's like, hey, you're parking in a reserved spot. Don't do it anymore, or security's going to be called and your car is going to be hauled away or something like that. But it's an orange sticker, and the thing is that once it gets that on the window, you can't get these things off.
The scarlet letter.
Exactly, and it goes on there, and you could always tell when someone had parked in somebody's spot because you could see it was all kind of scratched off. You could see all the glue and stuff. There was somebody who had parked in somebody's spot, and I remember they said, "Hey, come here, look at this." And the guy came by and he put stickers all over. The side window was covered with these orange stickers, completely. You couldn't even see through that side window. And I'm thinking, well, and they thought that was kind of funny. This will teach this guy never to park in my spot again. But to get those stickers off, you have to, used denatured alcohol. It didn't even come off with Windex. So I could just imagine that guy sitting there scraping and stuff like that in order to get it off. But it's like, again, he may not have understood, and I'm assuming he probably didn't. Sometimes you have vendors or people that come into there real quick. They see an open spot up front, and they just kind of pull in there. It's like, oh, my lucky day. They pull in front there. And this was really before they had all the handicap spots and stuff. I don't remember them having them back then. But they would just go ahead and pull up front and get out. So you don't know. Maybe it was somebody who was handicapped. Maybe it was somebody who just didn't know. But to turn around and slap all of these orange stickers completely on the window, and then have to tell everybody, "Hey, come here, look at this," it's like a retribution for something that they did, instead of, again, maybe considering, if you want to put one sticker on their window or something like
And
that.
kind of juvenile too.
Sometimes people are like that, but I guess, and again, you can see that where if you feel that this is something that you've earned, this is something that's a privilege, and it's again one of those things that you're right up to the front there. You're at the front of the line,
Who
and
do you
this is
think
yours.
You are taking my spot.
Exactly, and this is earned because I worked for the past 30 years or something like that, and someone just pulls in there, So, interesting thing. So humility. Let's take a look on page 190. It says, I'm looking here in the middle. It says, and he's talking about the church as the bride and Christ as a bridegroom. He says that if I'm moved to tears, it's because I acknowledge that I'm not only that I am what Let me try this again. If I am moved to tears, it is because I acknowledge that I am what I am only because of his love, compassion, and holiness, not by any virtue of my own, right? So how we are, what we are in Christ is because of Christ, right? So when we think about it, there's nothing that we did or nothing that we can do. That gets back to that, it's kind of very Protestant too, I guess. We always talk about that, unmerited grace, all these other things. But realistically, that's how we live. That's how our life within Christ is. It's nothing that we do. Now, we are expected to do all these things. So how does that kind of relate? How does that all work together? We're expected to live holy lives. Now, is that to earn a good front row seat, that parking spot in the front row of heaven?
Or get your face on the iconostasis?
That's it. Get your face on the iconostasis. What's the whole purpose of all that? Of all this good living, of not eating meat during fasting periods, of being in church on a Wednesday, of listening to me blabber on about the church. What's
Being
the purpose?
transformed,
Okay,
made more like God.
to be made more like God. Okay.
Well, we do it for ourselves in a way too. God made us to be close to Him, and it's by doing things like this that allow us to get close to Him,
And
or
how?
at least have the opportunity.
Right, and this is the question that I get a lot of times. Like, okay, cool. How? How does that bring us closer to God? What do those things teach us?
To live that way.
To live that way, okay, but
Like thinking about things other than ourselves.
okay, and I'm thinking of an H word.
Humility.
What's that? Humility. Yeah. How about that? It teaches us humility, right? And that's the whole thing. And as it says here, as he says in the text here, I mean, this is the, I would say, the pinnacle. And I know it's not step 30, but I'm going to say that's really the pinnacle. We learn that sort of humility because all that sin that we have, the sin, if you want to look even at the fall, right, in the Garden of Eden, what's that linked to? What's that a result of? Pride.
Pride.
I mean, we could sit there and
Wanting to be like God.
right, willing to be like God without
Well, believing the lie that they could be.
sure,
And
that they could be.
wanting that. Yeah.
To know good and evil when it wasn't God's plan for them to know that then. Maybe someday they
Our
will.
close to the door.
It wasn't
Yeah.
a lie. I mean, they could have been.
Yeah.
They would have been, but they wanted the shortcut.
Right.
That's
Exactly.
what we're trying to.
They couldn't rely on God entirely for all of their substance because He gave them everything. He said, all of this garden here, it's all yours. Only one thing that you cannot eat, and that tree right there. Because if you will, you'll die. Yeah, and that's the interesting thing too when we look at that, even in the face of humility. A lot of times, and I'd say really most of the time, if you look at especially because I'm in my class, I'm doing an exegesis on Job, and if you look at that, Satan, Satan, the accuser is what he's called, the accuser. He never really lies. Never lies.
There's kind of like a puddle of truth and a lake of lies.
That's the thing. And so what he does is he'll do is he'll turn that around to make you think differently. But if you look at it like in the Garden of Eden, did he really lie? He said, well, no, because you'll be like God. Is that the truth or is that false?
Well, I mean, it was false in that he said, if you eat of this fruit, then you'll be made like God, and God doesn't
And
want that.
knowing good and evil, right? So there's some truth. The point is that there's some truth to that.
Yeah, for sure.
So it's easy to turn around and say, well, that's an outright lie, and so we can avoid that, right? We recognize a lie if they say, if you do this, this, or this. I mean, I think about televangelists a lot of times. You do this, this, and this. It's a fast track to heaven. But a lot of times,
The deceive. Remember, you Asatan. Is that Hebrew?
yeah, it's Hebrew,
And
Hasatan.
it's accuser.
It's accusers as it's translated, right?
Because in Greek, it's translated deceiver,
Deceiver, right?
which kind of changes things. That's talking about lying.
Right, yeah. And I guess it depends on how you look at that. Like especially in Job, what he was saying was he was accusing. If you look at it from the standpoint of almost like a prosecutor is how some of the commentaries put him. He's the prosecutor. He's saying, God, as the judge, if this man here is visited with all these calamities, he'll curse you to your face. And, the whole setup is kind of odd, But I mean, that's just, so if you just look at it from that standpoint, he gets these calamities. It doesn't work. The prosecutor turns back and says to the judge, well, one more thing, if he's injured in his body, these sores, then he'll definitely curse you to your face, all right? Which means that he will blaspheme against you, which means that he will turn against you, essentially, when here's Job, a righteous man. So it's okay, let's give it a try. And he still doesn't do that. Well, then he brings in his friends, the three friends, actually his wife first, and then the three friends, who act as almost witnesses for the prosecution, who turn around and say, well, because you have these calamities visited to you, you must have done this, 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 and this. And Job says, no, I didn't do that. I really don't do it. He says, well, no, God wouldn't punish you like this unless you did something wrong.
And didn't they tell him curse God and die?
His wife did.
His wife did.
Yeah, wow.
Or actually in the Hebrew it was bless God and die. But yeah, curse God and die. Say something against God and die because of all these calamities. And the calamities not just befell him, they really befell her. Because all the children.
Why did she say that? What was her intention?
She was hysterical.
In saying that. I mean, I've never.
Well, yeah, and
that.
so if you look at it, if you look at it critically, you can say really that she is his conscience. She is his conscience. Where in his thoughts, see, because if you look at those verses in 2 verse 10, say, it says, and Job never sinned with his lips. Didn't say he didn't sin with his thoughts or anything like that. But at that point, he never sinned with his lips. So if you look at his wife as acting as the conscience, what would be the logical thing to do? You're sitting there, you've lost all your children, you've lost all your wealth, all right? Now you've lost you've lost your health, but now you're sitting on a dung heap in the city where everyone can see you and you're scratching these sores, all right? So now you've lost any kind of pride that you've had. All right? And if you knew that the easy way out would be to curse God and die, what would be the logical thing to do?
Curse God and die.
Yeah, that would seem to be, from the human standpoint, right?
So you think she was trying to help him by saying that?
Well, just get it over with,
Yeah, get it over with. But I think she represents his conscience. Mm-hmm. So you got to look at it from the standpoint of why do good things happen why do bad things happen to good people? So start from that standpoint. And what they're trying to show, in the end, what was the answer? Why do bad things happen to good people? In the end of the book of Job, what was the answer?
Because.
And that's the answer. Because that was the answer. There was no answer. You have that dialogue, after all these people accuse him of doing these things, Job said, no, I never did that. And so what it was piety for piety's sake, not because he was gaining anything, and that's what Satan was accusing him of. You take away all of his riches, and what's going to happen?
Well, but what happened at the end of the book? He got everything back.
He got everything back. But if you look at it from the standpoint, and that's I guess the hope from the way this is part of wisdom literature. From the hope, that's what you would expect, right? A happy ending. He got everything back twofold, right? Mm-hmm. So it wasn't like he just got one for one. He got more than what he had before. But going through that and all these accusations, and then in the end, he's got to confront God. And that's one of my favorite things where he says, gird your loin like a man and tell me, where were you when I made the world? Where were you when I did this? Mm-hmm. And Job's, well, gee, yeah, I guess that's true. But never in there does he say, I did this because Satan told me to, or I wanted to test you, I wanted to really test. That was never stated. Mm-hmm. So when you look at that, if you really look at it on a whole, from start to finish, you can say, gee whiz, that's kind of mean, I guess. These things happen, but that's kind of how things happen in our life, right? Mm-hmm. Why do bad things happen to good people?
And Job was very humble.
And Job was very humble, and even in the beginning, he would sacrifice on behalf of his children just in case they did something wrong. He didn't even know they did it. But that's how important it was to him that they didn't sin and that he didn't sin either.
There's my favorite verse in the Canon of St. Andrew of Crete, which we read on the first week of Great Lent. I think it's on Tuesday. And it speaks to the humility of Job, and it says that he was sitting on a dunghill in the middle of the city, covered in sores, and he turned the dunghill into his throne,
yep.
and the sores into beautiful pearls.
Yep.
Or gems, or whatever the translation is. And I just always find that so beautiful, because it's like, what When you are approached with these things, when these things do happen in your life, do you see them as sores and you have pity on yourself for sitting in dunghills, or do you turn them and discover the blessing that is within them with people that are suffering, people that are diagnosed with cancer, people that have, problems at home and stuff like that? Sometimes you have to look at sufferings as real blessings, And that's one of my favorite verses in all of hymnography of the Orthodox Church is that one, because it reminds us, and Job's a very, very good book for to read when you're suffering through things or something's going wrong in life. I don't know, maybe you could speak to this from the Protestant background. That book is largely ignored, isn't it? In the Protestant background, and I think there's a reason for that.
Well, it's always, at least from my experience, it's always been brought up as the patience of Job.
Yes.
The patience of Job. But patience wasn't really...
That wasn't the issue.
Yeah, it was not really... Yeah, the long suffering. The humility, the righteousness of Job. Maybe even the questioning of Job. Because, as you look at that dialogue between him and God, at the latter part of the book, that's some pretty deep stuff. He's saying, hey, God, he's actually as I heard it referred to one time, putting God on the docket. He's actually now turning the tables. He's now becoming Hasatan. He's now becoming the accuser, saying, God, why? Why did you do this? Why? How could you do that to me, a righteous man? What's it all for? That's kind of the question. What's it all for? If I'm going to do all these nice things, live the good life, sacrifice for my children in case they may have done something wrong, and then lose everything and still not curse you with my lips. Not sin with my lips. Do all these things yet still, you can't give me a better answer than that. Read that last part, that dialogue, and if you really take that and read it, you're like, whoa.
Well, you don't want them to read that because this is our Lenten study.
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay.
So you must come back.
Yeah, you must come back. That's the pre-read.
Next year. This is our next semester is on Job.
Right.
The trial of Job.
Trial of Job.
We'll have to start thinking about how we want to
And trial is a good way of putting it, because really, if you look at it, because I found a commentary that was done that was really interesting, and that's exactly. Do we have that commentary? Okay, but it's really good because it sets it up as a trial, as a real trial, with the prosecuting attorney, Satan, and God as the judge, and then all these witnesses. But it's interesting, all the witnesses are the witness for the prosecution, because all of them are saying, what did you do wrong? Why did you do it? If you hadn't done this, then you wouldn't have these sort of calamities before you.
Maybe that's how we'll do the classes. We'll make it a debate class.
Yeah.
Wouldn't that be fun?
And then each person can take, yeah.
One person does the accuser and then tries to, from their reading, explain what the accusation was, and then the other person has to come from an Orthodox standpoint. Boy, the wheels are spinning. This is going to be fun.
Yeah, so yeah, because really that and it's great stuff. But it's part of the wisdom literature of the Hebrew Bible, as we're told to say. So so let's go on. I'm diverging here. Page 190. It says, this is one of the way of understanding humility, that continuous paradox of contrition and joy, of mingling of tears and gratitude. That's interesting. This is why humility overcomes all passions: anger, avarice, lust, greed, despondency, hatred, and remembrance of wrongs. Sounds like some of the earlier steps, doesn't it? Kind of working our way up there. All of these things are from a deep-seated ingratitude and a binding love of self. To be humble, on the other hand, is to live in a joyful and peaceful state of thanksgiving. So, to be humble, on the other hand, is to live in a joyful and peaceful state of thankfulness, is what it says. Now, maybe thankfulness, but how do we get along in the world? We talked about this a little bit with the meek, right? The meek shall inherit the earth, but it's the strong that will hold the deed, or whatever that is. Right? Isn't that how it is? So, in humbleness in this world in which we live, in our business world, realistically, how far does humility get you? Humbleness. Be realistic. It's a tough road to hoe. It's a liability. Thank you. It's a liability. What is it seen as being? Weak. Exactly. Humility, humbleness is seen as being weak. And we talked about that in meekness too. You're not going to get ahead. You're not going to make the sale. You're not going to, finish the project on time if you're constantly humble, I guess. So it's not seen as something that can easily be done. So to turn around and say that to be humble, on the other hand, is to live a joyful and peaceful state of thankfulness, I don't know, that kind of comes off as being a little contrived, a little hard to reach in this day and age, doesn't it?
That's how far we follow.
That's how
I would
it
say that there is some aspect of humility that I think it's being talked about in business schools and in management is unconsciously competent. So it's, in other words, you're just a person with talents, but you don't think about what you were successful at. You don't think about, you're not looking for accolades, you're just task-oriented or goal-oriented, and you just do. And that's what people are kind of looking for. So I see it as kind of like humility in that. There's a self-awareness, a wisdom.
You're not arrogant
You're
about
not
it.
arrogant.
Right.
And
Okay,
that's
I
what-
made the sale, I
Let's move
took
forward.
care of this company or this person.
Right.
And that is a good thing, and you move on to the
So-
next thing.
I think there is some, I know companies like people like that, because without humility, there's drama, right? With humility, I've worked with people who are just very goal-oriented, but in a good way, that they just want there's almost a zeal for what they do and a purpose. And I think there's some humility in that. They're not looking for personal accolades or something
Right.
themselves. So
Well, there's some institutions, like a lot of our banking, I could speak for the banking institution, that if you have that mentality, you will not be there. You have numbers you have to hit. If you don't hit it, you're out of a job. And so it almost becomes and then they push it every week. They get calls, you get accolades, they praise you and praise you if you hit your numbers, and then they really make you humble if you don't hit your numbers.
Well,
So
that's a good point. So what about Wells Fargo? What sort of environment was that? An environment of humility?
I worked for Chase, I don't know about Wells.
Yeah. Well, with creating all those accounts, I mean.
Oh.
So with Wells Fargo, what do? They fired 5,000 people.
Yeah.
I read that, what a bloodbath. Lose 5,000 people. Well, why? Because of the pressures of making numbers.
It's bad.
And so what they would do is they would create you had an account, say a checking account, well, they would go ahead and open for you also maybe a savings account, maybe a passbook account, maybe a couple other little accounts. And they would take that money from your checking and they would put it in there, just enough to keep that account open. So then when the numbers came up at the end of the week, they go, oh yeah, my team or me or whoever opened N number, because we had these goals that we had to meet. And the attitude was of the management, we don't care how you make them. That's not our problem. That's your problem. You motivate your team. What does it take to motivate your team? You do what you need to do in order to make sure we're hitting those numbers, because we got to have those numbers. We got to have those new accounts. Now, I don't know why anyone looked at it and say, wait a minute, we have a 50% increase in accounts, but we don't have any increase in funds. But the goal was, what they do is like they tell us, you work towards whatever that goal is. So if they say your goal is to have N number of accounts, you're going to have N number of accounts. Now, they didn't say you had to do them legally even. They didn't say you had to have additional money and things like that. You just have to have the accounts. And so people will figure out how to kind of work around that. They will work towards the test.
For credit cards, it's another one.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, and then what happened was they had all these accounts, and the problem was they're taking money and moving them out and moving around. Well, then you would have standing withdrawals and all these other things, and they would hit some of the accounts, and those accounts would be overdrawn. People might just use it for a transfer. They put in enough money to make their house payment, and that's it. Well, the money was taken out, a few bucks here and a few bucks there to make additional accounts. It would hit, and now they ended up with all these overdrafts.
When
And
did
there was
when did the firing, when did that happen?
that was it was about 3 months.
Yeah,
three or 4 months
the
ago.
last 3 months.
Oh man,
The owner-
yeah.
The owner got dragged into Washington and
Wow. I missed
Yeah.
that.
It was
finally,
They changed a lot of the way they operate.
he retired, right?
Yeah, bazillion.
with all of us. But yeah.
That's a great point though about businesses and how it's almost impossible. Everything's on the number. Everything's about material wealth, and That's how we base our entire society, is how much money you're making
Sure.
for the company, how much money you're making for yourself, and then whenever you go away from that and try to practice a little bit of humility, then you, like you said, you're seen as weak, you're seen as not useless, because that you're seen as not believing in God, because the God of society is money, is material.
Right.
But
So
you
it's
know,
just-
I think, I'm sure there's lots of books written about this, but you really get into the whole, Christ and capitalism,
Mm-hmm.
right? I mean, that example is one of pure greed. My experience has been working for companies, I've been lucky enough to work for companies that people had a common, they were trying to promote an idea, not number of accounts. And by promoting that idea, they sold things, but it was, it wasn't just pure, it wasn't pure, I mean, they're all in it to make money, but it wasn't, pure commerce like what the example that you're describing.
Right.
Clearly management at Wells Fargo, and we've had numerous examples in other industries, just driven simply by greed,
Mm-hmm.
right? Or self-preservation.
Self-preservation, greed.
So I think you can have humility in business. I think you need purpose. And just opening up or meeting a number, I guess the only purpose is keeping your job.
Yeah. No, and I agree. I don't think that there's not a place, and that's something that we have to strive for, certainly, in our job. We have to figure that out. My point is that it's not, put it this way, from my experiences, it's not as valued as the person who can go out there and make the numbers. That's the person who's going to be sitting on the top. That's the person who's going to get the promotions. People are like, yeah, he's a great guy, but he is a winner. He's the one who hits the numbers. He's the one.
the go-getter.
Go-getter, yeah. He's the one that's set up. And my whole point is that when we look at that, how can we? Let me get back to where I was. How can we say to be humble on the other hand is to live a joyful and peaceful state of thankfulness? Where does that come from? If we're not getting that peace and joy, that peaceful and joyful state from our jobs, I gotta admit I don't. All right. I mean, and I got a good job. I like the company. DTE is a great company. They're not, but there's just aspects of it that it all comes down. It's a job. That's why.
That's how you should really look at it.
Yeah.
It's a means to an end.
That's the thing. It's not my life. But I mean, in society as a whole, where do we find that? How do we find, or do we find, peaceful and joyful state of thankfulness when we're living in a world that doesn't really value humility as, say, I mean, if you go to a monastery or something like that, maybe it's a little bit easier to find the joyful, peaceful state from humility. But I mean, what about in our society?
You're on I-75 and you're in a traffic jam. You're going through the rain all day long.
No humility there.
It's hard.
It's tough.
I don't know how. I mean,
Well, you can be thankful that you have a job that
Sure.
you're valued in. You can
Right.
be thankful you've got a home where your kids act like me. It doesn't have to be all about reward for you to determine success.
Okay.
Right. It doesn't have to be. It can be about those around you. I don't think it's not simple to make money.
Yeah.
It's about how you do it. And,
Okay.
And we can all be thankful. I don't care. Even somebody that's homeless that's standing on the corner with cardboard, if they really want to look at it closely enough, they can find something to be thankful for.
Sure. They can say that they have their health, maybe, or they're in a society.
Whatever it is.
Yeah.
That they received a Lazarus bag.
right.
That's right.
That's right. Yeah.
I tried to give one of those out in Lansing today, and the guy said, "No, thank you."
I want cash. Or I've got a machine
He
I
said,
can
"No,
send it
that's
back."
okay. I need $2.
Oh, he wanted
She
one.
said there's a gift card in there.
She said
You could trade it for the bottle of ribbon.
I said, "No, thanks." So I actually
No,
said,
thanks.
"What the hell with you?"
Back to step.
Back to step one. Now, let's talk about humility.
I got to admit.
Yeah, but well, there you go.
With you then.
Yeah. You don't want to have what I got to offer? I mean, I don't blame you. But I mean, yeah, I mean, so did you have a peaceful and joyful state of thankfulness?
I did. Actually, I did.
We tried.
Because you try. And
you know-
you can't control
Yeah.
whether he's going to take it or not.
This is not the intent of
Only
the
that.
event.
Look what you started. Gosh. Turning us all into... It's like,
Father, I'm afraid next year your bags will be well received if you just slip a 20 in.
I don't want
The
toothpaste.
gift card was supposed to be about
gift card to the wine
A pack of menthol cigarettes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Find a way out.
Find a way
You have to fight them
Find a wild Irish rose. That'd
Well,
be it.
Next year,
that's
we're
the
gonna
thing
work-
with
we're
these
gonna work
homeless
with the
people,
bar
you know?
For their free Thanksgiving meal and give half of our bags to the people that come in for that Thanksgiving meal. So it'll be-
Well, that's a good idea. Yeah.
That was Andy Marco who brought that up.
Wow.
So what was the question again that you were asking before?
So yeah, no, that's fine. But yeah, it says to be humble on the other hand. We're talking about, let me just start from the beginning. It says this is why humility overcomes all the passions. He talks about anger, avarice, lust, greed, despondency, hatred, the remembrance of wrongs. All of these spring from a deep-seated ingratitude and a blinding love to self. He says, to be humble, on the other hand, is to live in a joyful and peaceful state of thankfulness.
To who?
That's a good question. So how, and my question was, how in the world do you gain this joyful and peaceful state of thankfulness?
Isn't it what you
Just
said
to-
before is
Yeah, just be
participating in church? And
Well, just to
Okay.
be thankful
Learning
for the
and-
small things, the little things
Okay.
in life. Just
How about sending the praise all to God? You know,
Yeah, just focusing on. I mean, the small things is good, but what about the biggest thing? You know, our salvation. That's
There you
what really
go.
matters. You know.
Yeah.
And if we focus on that, that's how you can be stuck in a traffic jam, but if you think, if you're able at that moment to think, hey, well, I can just pray.
Yeah,
What's
yeah.
really happening? What's the worst thing that's happening? I'm gonna miss 10 minutes of a show or something. I'm gonna have to wait 10 minutes to eat dinner. I'm a wretched sinner that has been saved by a God of tremendous love. Is it really worth it? Should I be upset about this?
Yeah.
I mean, does it make any logical sense for me to be upset about
I mean, you don't have to be thankful for the traffic jam, obviously.
Right,
But,
but-
there are things,
You
and
can,
that's
you can be. I mean,
yeah. Well, maybe
You can be thankful that you're not in the wreck that caused that traffic.
That's
Right.
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 So I think, focusing on having the right focus, you're never going to be able to be joyful and thankful if you're always wanting more and wanting,
Right.
if you are focused on the right thing, on God, on salvation, you can see and recognize that you have everything you need and more.
Mm-hmm.
And I think if you're really living that true Christian life, if we all are, it kind of makes us invincible, because if the worst thing happens, we all die horribly in a fire. Oh shoot, we went to heaven. How horrible! I mean, really, nothing can harm us. If God is for us, then who can be against us? Kind of thing. So
No, very good. And I'm looking over here on page 191. Kind of up the second paragraph says we Christians are always bleating on about humility, yet hardly any of us have it. Kind of interesting. We're always talking about it.
speak for yourself.
Yeah. I'm sorry. The present company accepted. Perhaps we forget that humility is not merely a virtue to be admired, but one to be strived for, as we're talking about there. It's all very well praising saints and spiritual fathers for great humility, but unless we make the same effort to acquire humility ourselves, such praise will not get us very far. So as St. John writes, there's a difference between being humble and striving for humility and praising the humble. Right? So what he's kind of saying here is that just because you admire humility or praise somebody for being humble, that doesn't make you humble. Right? It's that constant state of thankfulness for all the things we do. And as Brian says, even if we're standing on the corner with a cardboard sign or something like that, there's still something to be thankful for, I shouldn't say even, but I mean especially for our own salvation. Knowing that we do have that salvation to look forward to. Knowing that we, through the church, have a way in order to acquire that humility, that salvation. The church helps to show us a way through Christ on how to
Chances are, if you think you're humble, you're not.
That's right.
Yeah. If you're there, you're not.
Right. Yeah, once you think you're there, it's usually when you're down on the first step.
Humility's complicated, though.
It
There's a lot
is.
of moving parts to it.
Sure.
Because I'm always thankful for God, but I'm usually the first guy to start a fight now. But I'm thankful.
You're thankful that you can beat the other
I'm
guy.
always thankful.
But
That's
I think
really, that's what occupies my prayer life more than anything.
Yeah, me too.
Maybe that's a sign of not being humble.
No.
No? You can't give thanks too much.
Well, I agree, and I think also humility is just like everything else. It's something that's acquired, if at all, but certainly through a lot of long, hard prayer, a lot of work, a lot of challenges. Just like anything else, like any of the virtues. It's not like a one and done. It's something that you're constantly going to be challenged for. And I think probably even some of the people that we admire for their humility, I'm sure they're challenged even on a daily basis, and maybe they've even failed. I don't know, none of my business, but I'm sure they are too, because just like our whole salvation, right? I was saved, I'm being saved, I will be saved. It's a constant movement towards heaven. It's the ladder, right? It's the constant climbing, however long that might take.
And even in eternity, even once you're in heaven, that climb doesn't stop either. Remember, we're always eternally trying to get closer to God because He's infinite. There's no way we will ever be able to come in complete union with Him. So this ladder doesn't just end once you get to heaven and it all snaps together. You're like, hey, I'm perfect.
No?
That's the beginning.
So, page 192. Here's a story St. John writes about. It says, the monk got up, and on the wall of his cell he wrote a sequence of names of major virtues: perfect love, angelic humility, pure prayer, unassailable chastity, and others of the similar kind. The result was that whenever vainglorious thoughts began to puff him up, he would say, come, let us go to be judged. Going to the wall, he would read the names there, and he would cry to himself, when you have every one of these virtues within you, then you will have an accurate sense of how far from God you are. Right? So he says, once you've acquired all these virtues, then you'll realize how far away you are. Not how close you are, but how far away you really are. And I think and I kind of read that and I thought, but I mean, it really is a good self-assessment. If you look at it, again, as God, as Christ being our standard, right? Rather than the other person, or even ourselves. Right? If we even say, well, I'm as humble as I can be, so that's as humble as I need to be. Right? No. Are you as humble as Christ? Are you as loving as Christ? Are you as forgiving as Christ? If the answer on any of those are no, then that means you need to go ahead and start back over again. You realize again how far away you really are. So,
Deacon, how do you know if you are humble? You know what I mean? It's not like you're going to wake up and say, well, I think I've reached it.
Father Gabriel will tell you.
I think I've reached it. Isn't it more like how people react to you, maybe? I mean, you would have to ask somebody, am I humble? How am I doing?
Am I humble enough? Yeah.
No, but think about it. If you wake up, would you just wake up and say, well, I think I've pretty much got humility down.
Right.
But then you read.
I know.
But then
Which
you
obviously
realize
is not.
the saints, though, and then you see, we call saints the humble saints because they're on such a different level than we are.
Where is it?
So I don't think you will ever get. You probably will never have to worry about the answer to that question.
Yeah.
You're never going to feel.
But you know what I mean? It's something.
But yeah, when do you know you made it?
Yeah.
But as human, also, I mean, this is those whole process is an exercise, and I think if you're, we're human, and those of us, I like to count myself in this group that are at least somewhat self-aware. Most people aren't,
Mm-hmm.
but self-awareness, I think, is how you sort of relate to Christ. If you know who you are, then you will understand. I think some people think they can climb right up this ladder. I did all that. Right?
Right.
They lack self-awareness in life and in their faith.
Right.
Because you have to be self-aware to understand.
That's
and I think I would best describe to you humility as a warm, fuzzy feeling. You have that, if you were at peace.
Right.
Peace. That is what.
If you are at peace and content, not feeling good about yourself, but if you're at peace, then I think that's a good sign that reach total consciousness.
There you go.
But it's
Become
not
one with
continuous, you know,
Yes,
that's the thing is that we talked about. I mean, you're kind of seeing as humility as like reaching this level. You know, there's even fathers of the church that you read about. You can YouTube this too, and you'll see interviews with priests or monks that live on Athos that have experienced the light of Tabor and have actually had real theosis and union with God on earth, and then they lose it. They think of something, you know, they might think in a moment of being shining with this light of Tabor, you know, did I reach this? Did I reach the end? And then they never get it again. And they say that you type in an interview about monks on Mount Athos and things like that have reached theosis, and they'll talk about how they weep every day because they had
lost it.
and they lost it, and then they'll spend the rest of their lives trying to get it back. So even if you reach a point of theosis in this life,
It's fleeting.
It's not like you're there and you can stay there. You know, it's fleeting. Yeah. So, but if you're ever interested, I mean, they're all in Greek, but they have subtitles and stuff like that. It's really fascinating. I did that one time, just late night one night, just typing in theosis monks, on YouTube, and all these interviews of people that have felt and radiated with this light. It's
that would be not only the most.
I'm sorry, what? Am I the light of Tabor?
The transfiguration, how Christ shone with that light that blinded the apostle. St. Gregory Palamas and the Fathers teach that we have that light within us that can shine with the light of Christ. That's a sign of us being in complete union with God. We are shining with the uncreated light of Tabor. And there's all the saints. It's called theosis. And all of their saints and things. That's one of the goals of Christianity is to try and get to that point where we have such union and communion with God that we actually shine with His uncreated light.
So
that's what we hear about in the sermons. You have the ability to live like gods. That's not just a metaphor. It's not a thing. You have that ability to do that.
It's the uncreated light. It's the same light that Moses saw on the burning bush, where there was a flame that never consumed.
Right.
So and
there are saints that have shown with this. Yeah. It's radiated from their skin. There's Multivilov, the conversation of St. Seraphim of Solov and Multivilov. Multivilov is having this conversation with St. Seraphim of Solov about acquiring the Spirit, the Holy Spirit, and then boom, and it's shining so far out of him, out of St. Seraphim of Solov, that it actually starts to illuminate Multivilov's skin. And Multivilov starts talking about what he's feeling, and it's really cool to read that on the acquisition of the Holy Spirit.
Right.
It's in there, isn't it? Have you read that? It's the actual conversation and feelings that he's having while this is going on, which is radiating from St. Seraphim of Solov. It's a powerful witness. You won't find it anywhere in any other Christian denomination.
Yeah, and I think St. Anthony would be able to have the fire on his fingertips. That's what I read. St. Anthony,
I had
great.
a similar experience recently. I'm sorry. I was fixing my garage door.
Oh,
touch the outlet.
Did you electrocute yourself?
It was under tension, and I had a wrench in my hand, and that spring went.
Yeah.
And the wrench, only by the grace of God am I here now. And the wrench, like 3 pounds, went back and smashed me. And I don't know how I turned my head, but I saw the white flash. I know that's the same thing. Hit really hard. Usually it's a guy thing. You immediately go to the head, and I can feel it dripping, and I'm like, oh boy. And Rebecca heard the bang and comes out and asked me, is everything okay? And I'm like, yeah, everything's okay. And I got this old dirty towel up against my head. But all the while I'm thinking this, this is, I was so grateful and so thankful.
right.
Yeah.
That's why I'm big on thankfulness, because I'm always hurting myself. I'm always giving thanks to God that I didn't get killed or do something.
Rebecca's just shaking her head.
Yeah, we are too.
But I did experience the flash.
Very brief, right?
But
do you want to experience that again? That's the
No,
question.
Not with a wrench.
Well, sometimes God, I think that's how God is a metaphor that's how He has to relate to me sometimes, just to get through. Just hit me with a wrench. You are a very humble person, so if that's any consolation.
Oh, now look at him puffing up. Look at him.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, don't tell me that.
You've
Now
made
I'm
it.
going
Don't
down a
even
few runs.
We'll start calling you David the Humble.
Oh, yeah.
He's reached his peak, now he's
Yeah.
gonna
So
go down.
now we've reached it.
Deacon Mike.
Thank
We need to make a troparium for David the Humble.
There you go. Got a ring.
Yeah, well, write it yourself. You're humble enough.
It's coming up in December.
David's retired. and then-
There you go. I'll take that one.
Deacon, I know this is taking us back.
Sure.
Okay, and I know we still have a lot to get through, but on page 189, that paragraph, I think, spoke to me more than anything in this chapter. And
Which paragraph are you referring to?
the very first one, since it is so
Okay.
difficult. Because I think that when you see that, when you really realize that by God's grace, that can at least be the beginning of some humility in you. I mean, really, when you think about it in the way that he put this here, you know, there's this poor, ugly, stupid, unpleasant woman, no prospects of marriage. She falls in love with the man of her dreams. He's handsome, intelligent, wealthy, noble, virtuous. Now imagine that her love for this perfect man is requited. Moreover, despite all the wrongs she has committed and however many times she's unfaithful to him, he never ceases to love and forgive her.
Right.
And then it goes on to say that's how Christ is with us. I mean, I think when we really start to see that and to get that, that can be the beginning
That's very good point. Yeah.
of humility.
What you're doing is realizing completely how unworthy
Right.
you are of that love,
Right.
of that sacrifice, of all those things that God has given us. Even just to be alive, even just to have that opportunity to be alive. Very good. Yeah. Great. Well, I'll tell you what. It's 10 after, and I think maybe we won't get to 26 tonight on discernment, but I'll give us something. No, I don't think so.
Do you want us to plan to finish this one next time, but maybe get into discernment too, so we should read discernment?
Yeah, well, I mean, there's a few more things here in humility. I don't know if we need to talk about that anymore. Why don't we go ahead and we'll call humility good. Is there any questions?
Okay.
I guess I know we just kind of blown through that, but I mean, I think we could take that and kind of, there's a lot of good stuff in here about talking about humility, but I think we pretty well covered.
Father, how many more we have 3 more before Christmas, correct? We have
Yes.
We have that. Okay, so we need to get through 5 steps and 3 classes.
Right.
So first, who's bringing the soup next week? Who is it?
I think it was Helen next
Helen
week.
is next week? Okay. I'll have to remind her.
With all humility.
Right. So if we go ahead and try to do 2 here for the next couple of weeks, then we'll be able to.
Because it'd be nice on the last week to finish it and then have a wrap up of the
Okay.
Yeah.
And then, as I said, next semester will be the trial of Job. So you could whet your appetites by this
Reading it.
Advent. Read Job. Very powerful book. And then we'll talk about source material and things like that. We're going to use, I think, Father Josiah's homilies on Job for our source material, which are really good. I'll give you a copy.
So we're reading 26, 27 for next time?
Yeah, let's go ahead and we'll do 20. So 26 is discernment, and then we'll start part 7, union with God, with 27, which is stillness. So let's see. And the thing is, I don't want to just jam on for the sake of moving forward, because I want to make sure that we're going through this and getting everything we can out of it. It's tough because some of these like humility, some of the other ones I know. They don't lend themselves very easily even to an hour's discussion. But let's see how far we can get, because I would really love to finish it up, because I've always I don't like it when we start a study and then never finish it, and that seems to happen a lot. We'll get maybe halfway through the book, and then I don't know, maybe someone gets tired of it or something, and then
But we're doing good with this one.
Yeah. So we're doing very well. So we'll pick up on step 26 of 30, which is pretty good. And then we'll continue to march with that. We'll have that done, God willing, by Christmas.
Thank you for the soup. It was very good.
Yes.
Very good, yeah, wonderful.
Lenten, too.
Recipe, please.
Yeah.